Shorebreak Sounds.
Welcome to Over the Falls podcast, episode number 52. This week we sat down with veteran journalist Mick O'Reilly, editor of the Cambrian News. We discussed Mick's career that has taken him from Dublin during the Troubles to war zones in Libya and Syria. He shares harrowing stories, near-death experiences, and his unfiltered views on journalism, local politics, and of course, Ceredigion County Council. A quick warning that this episode contains graphic accounts of war and conflict. This week's episode is sponsored by West Coast Jiu-Jitsu, self-defense, because you are worth defending. Bully-proof your kids and protect their future, covering all real-life scenarios, adult Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu covering self-defense and sport and striking classes. An amazingly friendly community dedicated to the well-being and future of their students. Now teaching at a new academy with 130 metres squared of matted training area in Aberystwyth. Come join the family.
So where were you born and raised, Mick? Let's get started at the beginning.
Oh, born and raised in Dublin. Father was a postman, 4 kids. I got a twin sister. She looks just like me, except she has a beard. 2 brothers, one since gone. Very ordinary upbringing.
Yeah, what was it like growing up in Dublin, though? Was it a pretty vibrant place to grow up, I imagine?
You know what? We were too busy playing with friends and everything else. But when you look back, you know, Dad was a postman. It wasn't the best paying job in the world, but we never went short for anything. And we used to come to Wales. He was a railway fanatic. You call him an anorak today, but he would pack us off to Wales every summer to go and look at steam trains. So I know when the man landed on the moon in July 1969, I was sitting on Miss Williams' couch in Bournemouth in a rented house. And so we came every year, you know, from about 1967 onwards. Rail, Borth, Tenby, you know, yeah.
So that's like the link to Aberystwyth, because one of my questions was like, how was the link to Aberystwyth from Ireland and then working all over the world?
There was no link. It was sort of, we were looking, it's funny how it all came up. I was sort of semi-retired. I'd been working for Russia Today during the pandemic, and that was winding down. And I was also working for Dubai at the time, and that was winding down. And we were looking at buying another property in the south of Spain, and I was doing some consultancy work for an English language newspaper down there, and we realised it was just too hot. And having lived in Dubai, I know it sounds strange, but we just can't do the heat anymore. So Tracy's father is getting on, and we're saying maybe it's time we move back to the UK, or we did something. We sort of looked at options there. So then this job came up in Aberystwyth, and said, hell, why not? Yeah, sure. It's interesting, Grandad, my father's father, actually spent 18 months in Frangoch in the IRA prison camp after the 1916 rising. Grandad my father was a postman. My grandfather was a postman, and I'm just male. But sorry. Think about that one. Yeah. So he was a telegram boy in 1916. He and his brother, they were reading telegrams and passing the information on to the Republican leadership. And then when the rebellion took place, Easter 1916, it lasted for a week. And then he was rounded up along with about 1,500 others and spent a month in a barracks, a British Army barracks in Dublin, and then they were shipped out to Frangoch in North Wales, and he was there we reckon from the end of May 1916, and was released on Christmas Day 1918. And then he went back to Ireland, and I guess they'd been well trained within the prison camp, so he went back and was making hand grenades. Now, you may not know this, but a hand grenade or a Mills bomb at the time has a 7-second fuse, and they didn't have the right materials, so he was making stuff that had a 4-second fuse, so it had to be found pretty quickly. So you can imagine you pull it 4 seconds, it goes, rather than 7 seconds. You can say grenade and dive on it or jump or whatever. And then they were in a bicycle shop, and the bicycle shop was raided twice and they didn't find anything. And on the third time, when the Brits came in to raid the bicycle shop, the tender coming was ambushed. And Grandad was picked up in the ambush and spent then 6 months in prison until the truce was signed. So sort of long family links in a roundabout way to this part of Wales.
There is, isn't there?
Wow.
Yeah. Little did I think I'd end up here, but hey,
Here you are.
Wow. Can we rewind a little bit to your sort of growing up in Ireland, and then when did that sort of want for like journalism or news, like when did that kind of hit you to realize you wanted to do something like that?
I never really. It wasn't on the list of things to do, but I was very aware of news and current events, and we lived about 2 minutes from the school. So I remember going to school. It was in June '68, and you'll know why now. And I remember going and telling my teacher, and I was 7 years of age, and telling my teacher I could hear the 9 o'clock news and still be in time for school. And I remember telling my teacher that Kennedy had been shot. And she said, "Oh, sit down," or something to that effect. "You stupid boy, Kennedy was shot like in '63. But of course it was Robert Kennedy in the hotel in Los Angeles. So I guess I've always had a sense of news. Politically aware. It was hard not to be politically aware growing up in the Troubles. My father would read anything from the Guardian to the Daily Telegraph to the Socialist Worker. So there was always newspapers or pamphlets in the house. So politically aware, yeah. Went to university, wanted to be a school teacher, and within a year that sort of school teaching wasn't going to be for me. So I did history and politics. You could teach history, but you can't really teach politics. So then I had sort of ideas of becoming a solicitor, but the thought of doing 4 more years after a degree didn't really sit with me. And there was also the reality too that we were from a working class district of Dublin, and solicitors don't come from working class districts in Dublin. It's interesting. Roddy Doyle, he and I were the only 2 Northsiders in the university, which on the south side. And I used to give Roddy a lift backwards and forwards in an old clapped out Fiat 124. And he was deeply involved in Republican politics at the time. I wasn't. I was too busy working and trying to pay my way through college. So yeah, I then started to write for a student newspaper. Didn't know what we were writing about, but sort of fell into it. And then a postgrad diploma in journalism came up, and I said, well, that sounds like fun. Did that for a year, and it's been downhill ever since, you know.
And here you are.
Yeah, so that's sort of... And then I, from there into a press agency. I used to write the horoscopes every week. We'd send out... We used to get £5 for sending out photocopies of horoscopes. Everything was done on typewriters in those days. So there was a big pile of newspapers in the corner of the office, and you'd pick the one off the bottom, open it up, and whatever was Pisca's last time became Libra or Libra, the next one around, and you put it back up, and that's how it was done. And then we got a break, and then I started covering what they call the special criminal courts, which were during the Troubles. The government set up special courts, no juries, reverse onus. In other words, you're guilty until innocent.
Was that specifically for
terrorist
what was going
crimes.
on with the IRA, yeah?
Yeah. It was what you were charged under what was called the Offences Against the State Act 1939. And it was actually a piece of legislation that was brought in for the Second World War. Ireland was neutral. So when the Troubles broke out, they realised they had to do something because judges were being intimidated, jurors were being intimidated, and they needed to deal with political crimes as such in a different way rather than sticking through civil courts. So they set up what was called special criminal courts. Northern Ireland had a similar thing called the diplock courts. So it was interesting to sit in the court and see guys who had been charged, some with horrific offences, others, possession of explosives, just weapons of, death.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't recognise the court. They wouldn't stand up when the judges came in. They didn't recognise its authority because they believed there should be an All-Ireland court rather than one that was from the Republic. So you'd see guys getting sentenced to 20, 30 years and they'd be sitting there doing the crossword. It wouldn't matter to them, So that was interesting. I always remember one guy who was the same age as me pretty much. And he committed a murder. This wasn't in the special criminal court. This was in the regular courts. And he basically had been on the piss for 3 days drinking cider. Ran out of money, robbed a sweet shop in a small village, and beat the woman to death with a metal pot so hard that the pot cracked. And he was the same age as I was, and it was the first, if you like, murder trial that I'd sat through for 3 weeks covering it. And then the verdict comes in, guilty, and you see this guy locked away for life.
Yeah.
And I've often thought of him down through the years. He's probably out now. I mean, I'm going back to 84. So if you do 25 years, what's the math on that? He's probably out, living his life. Do people know? So that one, I often think of that.
So how old were you then?
I was born in 1960, so 84 would have been 24, 25.
Yeah. Okay, so a little bit before you went to Canada then, is that right? Is that a few years before you went over to Canada?
I was kicking around weeklies first and then dailies in Dublin, and I was earning £365 a week, and my take-home pay was £156. And because you were paying so much in tax, and I used to drive an old Toyota Corolla, and I couldn't afford the road tax. Everybody was the same. Everybody was leaving. The country was basically bankrupt, and anybody who was working was paying huge amounts of tax. So I said, "Oh yeah, well, we'll see what happens." Fancy Canada, and I fancied Australia. Didn't go to America because there were too many Irish there, and I say that. At the time, a lot of money was coming back into the country from Republican bars in New York and Boston, and they were, it was all wrapped the green flag around me, and they had no idea of the mayhem that they were causing,
Yeah.
If you've been on the scene of a bombing and you see bits and pieces, no country's worth that for. And it's funny me saying that, even though Grandad wasn't making hand grenades. Hey ho! But yeah.
I just want to go back to the just quickly before we get into Canada. Just going back to the time you were working in Ireland during the Troubles. Did you ever feel like unsafe in reporting on these things? And because you were saying that there was no jury in these places because they were afraid, I guess, weren't they?
You'd be afraid. With a name like Mick O'Reilly, and you crossed and I was working for the Irish Press at the time, and as soon as you crossed the border, you were basically going into a war zone, dressed up as any way that the Brits would like. It was still a war zone. I often, my partner's Norwegian and has lived in Norway for a long time, and it's funny that Norway and Britain discovered North Sea oil together. The Norwegians have put aside all of their money. Every penny that came out of the North Sea, in effect at the time, was spent on security in Northern Ireland. So if you want to know why the country is broke, you can blame us paddies. but that's part of the economic reality of it. Was it safe?
Did you feel safe, like personally reporting on these things?
It depends where you go. I mean, it was a very, 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 very segregated society. One end of town would have green, white, and orange curbstones and Republican flags, and the other would have red, white, and blue, and loyalist flags, loyalist murals, Republican murals. If you walked into a bar and you weren't sure, you'd go into McGonagall's, you wouldn't go into the Crown and Anchor. But if the bar was called the Railway Bar, oh, that's a tricky one. So you walk in, and the first thing you do is you'd look and see what's behind the bar in the optics. And if it's Scotch, that's not a good sign. If it's Irish whiskey, that's a good sign. Everybody served Guinness, but if the lager is Tennent's or Harp, you can tell straight away what newspaper people read. The Irish News, the newsletter. There'd be a sign up, we take punts, or there wouldn't be. No punts accepted. See, there were subtle differences. Yeah, you were afraid, but we only ever went in and out doing our business, but the poor people who had to live there for months on end, years on end, and growing up. I actually went back to Belfast. I left in '88 to go to Canada, and I was back in Belfast for, it was April 2004, April 2012. It was the 100-year anniversary of the Titanic sinking, and Titanic had opened, and it was the European Music Awards. And I was working in Dubai at the time, so I was sent off to do that, which was great. And I met a guy. Belfast had changed totally, and I was at peace. Still subtle, different. You could tell there were tensions there, but it was certainly a lot better. And I remember talking to one guy called John, and I couldn't tell, as would say in Ireland, what foot he kicked with, which is, I couldn't figure out what background he was from. And I actually had to stop him and say, sorry, John, this sounds like a very ignorant question, but I have to ask, what foot do you kick with? And he said, I'm actually really pleased that you stopped and asked me, because it shows that we've moved on from the bomb and the bullet. And he said, yeah, I'm loyalist, or I'm Protestant. I'm not loyalist, I'm Protestant. But he said, I'm Northern Irish and I'm Irish, and I also feel part of Britain. And he said, we're now a generation where before kids can go to school, or they never mixed in school, now they can go to school together. They can actually sit opposite each other on a chessboard and play chess. Whereas before, they'd play rugby, they'd play hockey, they'd play Gaelic football, they'd play soccer, they'd play hurling. Everything was...
So it's come a long way.
Yeah. It's a process, and it's getting better. Brexit hasn't helped, in the sense that what it has done is underlined the fact that Ireland is different and it needs to be one. I firmly believe that, although I don't believe in killing for it. So yeah, and it's interesting, and people who don't understand the difference and how fragile the UK is, and I would say Boris Johnson would be one of those, for him to simply draw a border down the Irish Sea and expect things to be okay, just displays complete ignorance of history and economics and politics and everything. I'm not a big Boris fan.
It's you read into what Boris is actually like. He's a bit of a clown.
Yeah,
he just had really good support around him.
I never met him.
You never met him?
Never met him.
But he just seemed to be a good person to work a room. That's kind of what he was good at. People would just sort of go to him.
He tells you what you want to hear.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
But he'd been groomed almost his whole life to give that typical kind of like MP answer, going to the schools that he went to and the uni.
Even when he worked for, as a reporter or a columnist, when he was posted out, he simply lied and fabricated stuff. And I'm not saying that's a matter of record. He was fired for lying, and from a newspaper, not as Prime Minister. But that's...
I'm sure there's a few fibs.
Oh, yeah.
Whilst he was Prime Minister.
Gosh, yeah.
But going back to Canada then. So did you start with the Sun initially? Was it the Toronto Sun?
No. I started... when I went first, it took me about 6 weeks to get acclimatized to everything. And then my first job was run a little weekly because I didn't have Canadian experience. So my first job was run a weekly. And then from there, very quickly, through a good fortune, the sales manager on the newspaper had been the girlfriend of a guy who was the CEO of a chain of newspapers in Toronto. So she literally picked up the phone and told Kerry Lambay that she had the best journalist in Canada who just came off the boat. So he said, well, I guess I better meet him then. And then so a week later, I'd never been in a skyscraper before. I was up on the 40th floor of an office in Toronto, a big corner office. And he said, well, where do you want to go? And so he offered me a job, and I could have gone to Brandon, Manitoba. I looked at the map and I said, I don't think I can drive there from Toronto. It's like 2 days drive. He said, no. So I went to a city daily called the Oshawa Times, big General Motors town. They build Chevy cars and trucks. So I went there, started as a reporter. Within 18 months was running the city team, running 20 reporters, 6 photographers.
That's a pretty impressive trajectory for such a short space of time.
Canadians are very laid back. I'm not. I'm more aggressive. Was more aggressive, or expect higher standards of reporters, and sort of just became the city editor. At that stage, marriage number 1 broke up. What happened was we got married in April of '88, moved to Canada in May of '88, and she was pregnant in June of '88. So one thing after another. My daughter was about 4 years of age when that marriage broke up. Jean went back to Ireland with Emma. I stayed on in Canada in Oshawa for about 6 months, and then went back to London freelancing, and then on a contract, first initially with the current bundle, like the London Sun, doing page layouts, and then on to the Express and Star. From there, back to Canada, and then started working for the Sun chain as basically a page designer and editing copy, rewriting headlines, putting a bit of wit into them. One of my favourite headlines was he had, what's his name? Andrew, that knob. He had just...
Randy Andy?
He had just broken up with Fergie.
Fergie, yes.
The Duchess of Cork, and he got back... and he got back together with her. And I remember writing the headline, Prince Charming Fergie 4 nights a week. Just
nice.
Yeah. So that was fun, rewriting all those headlines. And then did that for a few years. And then the newspaper up in Ottawa, Sunshine also, were looking for a city editor, which was run the city side reporters. So having had experience of that, up to Ottawa then, and started teaching part-time and then running the city team.
The Sun, the tabloid sort of newspaper, you can get away with a lot of things with the headlines. Do you sensationalize them at all?
At the Sun? I'll tell you straight up. Working at the Star, which is part of the Daily Express at the time.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
When you'd go to pick up a page to do the layout, the headline had already been written.
No way.
Yeah, so then it was clear what the story was from the headline, so you torqued the story to suit the headline. But that was their style. It's not my style now. But
how can you get away with, not you personally, but how do they get away with it? As in, because is it the truth? Or is it just trying to sell it?
People buy those newspapers, the red tops, because they have a certain outlook on life. So if you want more serious journalism, I'm sure you'd buy the Guardian or it's there for what people want. And at the time when I was working at the Sun, the current bun in London, Kelvin Mackenzie was the editor. And at the time there was a price war, circulation war, and the Sun was selling 4 million copies a day, which is huge. This is 93 or so, selling 4 million copies a day. So when you edited a story, instead of saying the Prime Minister said, it would be John Major told your 10p Sun. You had to write that into. So it's brilliant marketing. Wouldn't get away with it at Cambrian News.
We'll come to that in a minute.
Yeah. How long did he work for the Sun for? Is in like
which Sun? Okay.
Is in the UK or like England based?
I was there for 6 months.
Ah, right. Okay.
Yeah. And I actually walked out on the Sun in the middle of a shift. I was looking after the home counties, I was looking after the Irish edition. So what happened is that the home counties went first, and then there were 8 pages that need to be ripped up and Irish stories put in there, and they pissed me off. Very anti-Irish in the office, and it was at the time where you could shut down London with an Irish accent and 5p, and it was just a nasty place to work. I myself found it there, even though at that stage I was a Canadian citizen. So it just, I basically told him to stick it and walked out.
You've travelled pretty extensively.
Yeah.
Looking through your CV, but there was 3 things that jumped out at me. Okay, there's Libya, Syria, and Guantanamo Bay. Can we talk about those?
Of course.
So, can I ask, what were you personally doing in Libya and Syria?
Between 2000 and 2008, I was putting out a huge daily newspaper in Toronto.
Okay.
And I was in a job that nobody else wanted, but everybody felt they could do better. So basically I was putting out the newspaper at night. Editors had gone home. I was putting it out at night. It was a mic call, and I could call you at 2 o'clock in the morning if you wanted, just to make sure, but you wouldn't appreciate that. So you'd have to face the Monday morning quarterbacks every day when you went in. Why did you do that? And I was fine. And you'd say, well, why don't you do it? No, you're doing a great job, because they wouldn't want to work the hours. So from there, I learned a lot and making a lot of calls, and was actually headhunted out to Dubai to run Gulf News or to reorganize the newsroom. Never been in a Middle East country before, out to Dubai. That was great. Did reorganize the newsroom within 2 years and told them, oh, that's great, but how about I go back writing? And they said, yeah, you can do whatever you want. So I realised very quickly I'd get into a lot of trouble if I was to write what I wanted to write about the UAE, because there is censorship there, and it just wasn't worthwhile. So I decided the best thing to do is to start doing some foreign work. And I was lucky or unlucky enough to be in the Middle East during the Arab Spring. So that's how I ended up covering those different places. The revolution broke out in Syria. Let's talk about Libya first.
Yeah, okay.
All right. So the revolution broke out in against Gaddafi, I believe it was the 17th of February, 12 years ago. So what's that?
Now you're asking.
13 years ago, 2012.
Yeah.
2012.
Yeah.
12, yeah.
So we gave it a few days. The revolution was either going to be put down or it wasn't. So we came up with the idea that I would go into Libya on a one-way ticket with a videographer / photographer who spoke Arabic. And the idea was that we didn't know how long it was going to take, but we'd give it a month and possibly 2 months to go. So flew to Alexandria in Egypt, and it's about an 8-hour drive all across the top of Egypt to a shithole called Al Saloom, and it really is a pimple on the arsehole of Egypt. It's a terrible place, and I slept spent a night there sleeping beside an open sewer. Like, it's just horrible. So the border between Egypt and Libya, it's a kilometre apart. So you go through a barbed wire fence, then you walk along a track, and you can't leave the track because there's still landmines in the sand from the Second World War. You know, the Brits and Rommel and whatnot were going backwards and forwards there. So into there, and CNN, was it CNN? No, Fox News arrived at Al Saloom in a big RV. Tucker Carlson was there, and so they were really pissed off that they couldn't take their big RV across a motorhome across the desert so they had to get all their stuff out and slept through the desert just like us. So crossed over. First thing you do is hire a driver, you know, bodyguards. So I was paying $20 a day for a bodyguard called Muhammad and $20 a day for a driver. And I was being driven around sometimes in a vano, diesel vano, or a petrol vano, and a diesel Hi-Ace. And he was filling the vano for $5 US. And 12 litres of water, like litre bottles of water, was $5 US. So literally the same price. Crazy. So I spent 6 weeks there. First thing, we went to Tobruk, on to Benghazi, a place called Ras Lanuf, through the desert, and basically they were chasing Gaddafi forces. That was a rough one. One of the saddest things I've seen was a place called Al-Baida. And actually, if you've watched the SAS series, you know, this Rogue Heroes. So when they started to blow up in the first series, when they're blowing up airfields, one of them is actually Al-Baida. Al-Baida is a small regional airport, like the one that's down in mid-Wales, down on the coast.
Oh, in Swansea?
No, the one down Aberdeen.
Oh, sorry, Aberporth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there was a shed in there, like a warehouse type thing. So what had happened was the Gaddafi forces took 95 prisoners or people hostage while they were waiting for their air transport to come. When the transport came, they put them up against the wall and killed them. And I had gone into this departure lounge terminal about 40 minutes after it happened, and they were taking the bodies out on grey-green army blankets, dragging them across the floor. There was guts and blood and shit and piss. Yeah, and then I couldn't believe it. I was in shock. And I went outside and sat on the curbstone and cried like a baby for about an hour. Just could not fathom it. And then you sort of said, well, shit, got to report on this, and you do. And then you carry on to the next one.
Is that is that the first sort of like serious sort of murder that you've ever seen, or horrific crime?
I've been on the scenes of bombings or after bombings in the north. That was the first. That one got to me.
Yeah.
That one got to me. Yeah. I mean, I still see it. It's filed away, but I can still see it, talking about it now. Yeah.
So it still affects you, obviously.
Pretty horrific thing to witness.
Well, I didn't witness the shooting, but the aftermath.
Fresh, wasn't it?
Yeah.
You know
literally very fresh. And when somebody's shot, it ain't like you see on television. It's quite nasty, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that was pretty early on.
Yeah, another one was there was a kid, he was 13, Muhammad. I don't know Muhammad. Mm. And the rebels were looking for people to join. So Muhammad said, I want to join. He said, no, you're too young. And he told him, no, actually, I know how to use an RPG. You know what an RPG is?
Yeah.
So they said, no, you don't. He said, no, I'm really good. I have it on a video game and I'm really good. So they gave him an RPG and they said, hit that white door. So Muhammad goes out, hits the white door. So they said, you're in. So there was a fight to take a military base, and Muhammad, in the course of 2 days, took out two. I believe he took out 2 personnel carriers, right, with his RPG. And when I met him, he was lying in a hospital bed, 13 years of age. He'd been shot down his right side, and his arm was on a board, and it was yellow and red and festered and swelling. And they were taking his arm off the next morning. 13 years of age. Video games.
You think both sides of it, like he'd been hit himself and he'd also killed other people
at
that age, you know?
But why should a 13-year-old be even in that position? You know, this is, you know... and then you'd speak to soldiers. Initially, the rebels didn't take prisoners. And one of the things that they would do is they would go on what they called was a Chadi hunt. Chad, the country Chad, Chaddies. And basically, Gaddafi had a lot of mercenaries. They were sub-Saharan and so tended to be black. And they were nicknamed Chaddies. So anybody who was black basically was put up against the wall, of fighting age, up against the wall and shot. Gaddafi troops opened fire on his own people, and I remember in Benghazi, about 10 days into it, speaking to one who said that, he had opened fire, but he said he fired low, and that if they didn't fire into the crowd, they would have been shot. So I I did that for, felt like a lifetime. It was only 2 months. And then you realise that he's not going to fall, and the newspaper is limited resources, and you're paying everything in cash. We were 1,400 kilometers into Libya, and I was running out of cash. So myself and the photographer flipped a coin to see who's going to go back into Al Saloom, all the way back in Egypt to get money. I lost the toss, so 1,400 kilometers.
Oh God!
A day in Al Saloom, and then 1,400 kilometers back to catch. And a French photographer came with us, and we were in the Vano, and I was asleep on the back, and he was behind the driver's seat, and there was a checkpoint in the middle of the desert somewhere, and the soldiers were drunk, no alcohol in Libya. Yeah, right. They were drunk, and they battered the shit out of him. You know, I was on the floor at the back and got away with it.
That must have been terrifying, Mick.
Yeah. The closest, I've had scrapes with death, and I'm not afraid to die. The closest was Bahrain. Is a nasty little place, right? It's 1/3 Sunni, 2/3 Shia. And when you learn the difference very quickly in the Arab world, particularly in the Gulf states, which are Sunni, they don't like Shia. Iran, Shia, Hamas, Shia. But 2/3 of the people in Bahrain are Shia and have poor housing, no access to jobs, discriminated against. So they rose up. The Saudis came in to help the Bahrainis put it down. And I remember lying under a truck. I was doing live radio back to Dubai and filing for the web at BlackBerry. So I'm lying on the ground and the truck's above me, and it was an Apache helicopter flying overhead, and there was pretty hefty gunfire going on around. And I said, I'm not getting out of this. And I was actually quite calm with it. I remember saying, well, I hope it doesn't hurt too much, or I hope, like, don't burn me, but I hope it doesn't hurt too much. And yeah. And was I ready to die? I was, at the moment, yeah. I didn't want to, but you're there. You're not getting out.
No.
Or if you try to move, you're certainly going to get it. So you just stay put and hope that it goes away. And I remember saying to myself, well, yeah, I've had a good one, so I'm all right with this. So if I go upstairs, I can answer my case, or, I know we all make mistakes in life, so you make amends. So I was quite content that if I went upstairs to answer, to say, well, these were the cards I was dealt, and that's what I did, and I was ready for it. Don't want it to happen. Yeah. I love life,
Yeah.
But so I've had a few ones like that, in Benghazi, Grandad, hand grenade came in to the. We were watching Arsenal play. It was knockout European football. We'd all filed. The press corps was all sitting there, and we were in the mezzanine, in a coffee shop in the mezzanine, and a grenade came in and went off, and yeah, that'll clean your underpants for you.
Oh, I bet.
You've had so many close calls and situations.
Yeah, but
has it had an effect on you now, with everything you've seen, everything you've been through? Do you still think about it?
I think about it, and it's more like, shit, I can't believe I did that, or I wouldn't do it now. I wouldn't like to run at a checkpoint anymore, like, because I'm carrying too much beef. But in Syria, I was at a checkpoint, and the checkpoint was attacked, so behind a sandbag and just head down, It doesn't affect me. I'm grateful that I did it. I'm lucky that I did it, and I'm very privileged. And I remember interviewing somebody for a reporter's job at the Cambrian News, and she was no more interested in the job. She was just more interested in talking to me and how did I get to be a foreign correspondent as such. So it's surreal when you've spent a week in a refugee camp and you come back to Dubai airport at 2:00 and the world's travellers are on the way to different corners of the world, coming and going, duty free shopping, and you get off the plane and you walk into this and you sort of say, you people have no idea what's going on.
Yeah, it's a hell of a contrast, isn't it? Particularly to go to somewhere like Dubai.
Yeah. So, I had the chance to do and travel a lot, and basically to do where I wanted to go. I did Ukraine the first time around. The civil war and the end of the civil war in Sri Lanka, U.S. elections. So pretty much I could do whatever I wanted, and they were very good to me in that way. Well, I'd straighten out the newsroom for them in that regard. So I have no complaints in that regard. But yeah, I was lucky.
The first time I came across you'd written an article in the Cambrian News, I was reading it, I thought, you're not messing around. You are straight to the point and you don't hold back. It was refreshing.
Yeah, well, I've been told that. Okay, so when I came down to Cambrian News, the newspaper has been around since, I think, 1860, and I'm very conscious that it's my role to keep it going as best as possible. Clearly, it's not just a newspaper anymore. It's on print, it's online, and the market has changed, and the dynamics of journalism have changed. But it's my job to maintain the integrity and the reputation of the Cambrian News brand as much as possible. When I came down, I found it sedate, and to the point where I just sat back and watched for the first few weeks, see how they went about it. And they were filling the paper, but they weren't giving it much thought. And the quality of the stuff was good, but it lacked an edge, it lacked vision. And when I gathered the reporters around, I said, look, you're working in the trenches. It's my job to basically stick the head above the parapet and see the lie of the land, and this is where we're going. I think that before they lacked the desire to make a difference, they simply reported the news. We report the news, we tell the truth, because if it's not the truth, I'll be sued. But it's also not our job to be neutral, and particularly nowadays. And when what do I mean by that? The council can say, we have a survey that says we're doing very well, and they can come along with another survey that says very well. But when they hide a survey that they taken from people of Ceredigion who said, actually, you're doing a really shit job, that deserves to be told. I think that people in this county are not getting value for money. I think it's poorly organised and poorly run. And I think it's our job to hold people in power to account.
I totally agree. Yeah.
What would you do?
What I'm doing?
Yeah, but no, what would you do in their position? Like if you were at the top, what would you change? For starters, let's look at the reality. The population of Ceredigion is 75,000 people. Out of that, there's only something like 15,000 households that are paying tax. We're paying super high salaries for people who they're getting London wages and Manchester wages from Ceredigion, and there's too many people earning too much money for doing too little work. The council structure is wrong. There shouldn't be a cabinet. And quite frankly, when there's an asset that's worth 20 million sitting empty, what's been done with that? I think they're getting peppercorn rent from the health board and that, but that to me is criminal. That's an asset for 20. If that was sold, or if they were back working in it and Penmorfa was sold, and the people of this county would have a chance. How come when I look at Gwynedd, same demographics pretty much, bigger geographical area, Clyde Run also,
yeah,
that works. I think that there's the weight of the council is too much to the south. I don't know. I have to be careful when I say this, but I think that Evian Evans, the CEO, has a lot on a lot of people, and I think that people are afraid to stand up to him. And whether it's the schoolmaster mentality or anything else, it's simply wrong.
Do you think he's overpaid?
Absolutely.
Yeah?
Yeah, I think a lot of them are overpaid.
Yeah. I think sometimes in an establishment like that, my eyes are looking from the outside in, because I don't work for the council, but seems like there's like, happens in a lot of places, it's like a culture, and you've got people working there for a very, very long time, and they're kind of like almost like part of the furniture, and it's quite hard to change culture sometimes.
It is, places. And God only knows what the salary or what the pension will be like in the pension payments. I don't have the figures in front of me, but I'm certainly aware that the cost of staffing, past and present and future, is huge. And we're not getting value for money. No. How can we spend at least 350,000 on a 2-day rally, 3-day rally, and want to close 4 primary schools where the net saving is £90,000.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's quite hard to argue against that, because when I see schools are going down, I think it's awful. I think, it's so important to keep these.
So if we're so
going.
concerned about want to keep people in the county, teaching them Welsh, giving them a sense of community, we'll shut their schools down. But we'll bring in cars for a weekend, and you can run around, boys, and have great fun. And it's not the environmental costs. I'm quite partial to a bit of speed myself, as in cars. But it's the principle of the thing.
Yeah, I'll put it out there. I really enjoyed that weekend, and I do think things like that for a town are really, really good. But I do find it hard to argue with the costing, and then they're trying to close schools, etc. Yeah.
So if we want to improve Aberystwyth, right? So the stretch of the avenue, for example, that's down beside Lidl.
Yep.
Yeah.
So why haven't the council and the town council actually said, you know what, boys, we're going to put down some slabs, we're going to run some power cables up there and some water, so that we can actually have a farmer's market there instead of being over in the old Aviva.
I think everybody's thought about this idea. Christmas market.
Christmas market.
It's a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer.
Rib and beer fests. You can have a festival on in Aberystwyth. You even have a train that comes in once in a while.
I can't answer that question.
It's a great location for it, because you don't have to close anything. It's not like you're going to close any roads. It's just pedestrianised. It's done. Yeah, it's a really good point.
We have a story today that says that the business rates in Aberystwyth are 3 times more expensive than they are for the Kingsway in Swansea.
Yeah,
I read that.
And
I read that today.
So,
but business rates are set by the Welsh government, aren't they? So the Welsh government is per square metre in a shop. It's set by the Welsh government, not Ceredigion County Council.
But if you're a business, why would you even bother coming to?
It's monumental. Like the post office now, for example, is now empty again, and it's a huge property. Like, who's going to take that on? You got business rates, you got rent, you got council tax. Before we even sell a peanut,
economic development in Aberystwyth is the opening of a charity store.
Yeah, sometimes that Main Street does look a little bit sad, and I do try and be positive about the town, because I love the town and I'm from the town. But it is sometimes it's hard to defend when you look at it. Sometimes
people would sort of look at me and say, "Look, what does this Irish Paddy know about coming in here and telling us what to do?" Maybe it takes an outsider to actually look and see how things can be different or what's wrong. And maybe people will listen to me, but I think I'm in the position at the Cambrian News to actually make a difference. And we're not afraid to say what's wrong, and we're also not afraid to say what's right. Sadly, there isn't much right, but we're not afraid. I think that Bronglace is a great hospital. When I came here first, I was like, Bronglae. And I was presenting French.
You're dropping the S.
Yeah.
Francois Bronglace.
Yeah. No, it's Bronglace, you idiot. Yeah. I said, okay, won't make that mistake again. Yeah. I think that's a great facility.
I work in Bronglace, actually.
Do you? I didn't know that. Yeah. But I think it's a great facility. But the health board is. There's a lot of things, and it's not just Ceredigion, and it's not just Wales, it's Britain. There's a lot of things that are broken here.
They are.
And it's...
They are.
It's 14 years of austerity under the Tories, and...
It's a shoestring budget. It's been held together by, I see people doing amazing work in that hospital every day, and... they're doing the best they can, like I don't know about the higher management. Maybe those decisions are...
What I will say is this. Look, I've lived all over the world. I can't tell you... Well, Canada, the UK, Spain, UAE, Ireland. And I visit a lot of countries, but this is the first time I actually feel that this is home for me since I left Ireland in '88. So this is the first time now I actually feel I belong in a community.
That's really nice.
Yeah, that's good.
So I am invested in it, and being the editor of the Cambrian News, I feel doubly invested, because my job is to make sure that the thing carries on. There are challenges. I mean, the paper, it's making money. Is it making enough money? Management would, my bosses would say no. Everybody can read it all free online. That has to change. Journalism is expensive.
Paywall, maybe?
Yeah.
No, there's a paywall coming, absolutely.
Yeah, is in like, because most things have a paywall nowadays. Is in like, I know you get money from advertisements, etc., but a lot of things have a paywall, don't they? Or at least to fill in a survey, maybe get data collection. Or
We've started all of that, which is why you've got the registration thing. There's a lot of work going on in the background, and it consumes a portion of my working week. But there is a paywall coming. We're not sure of the level yet. But it has to come. And I think it's important because, quite frankly, with Facebook and the way things are going now, even on X, everybody has an opinion. Everybody doesn't have the truth. And it costs money to actually put the truth out there. It costs money to invest in journalists and everything else. So if you can read or say anything you want on Facebook, you can't read or say anything you want in the Cambrian News. So I'm legally responsible, and I have to make sure that and there's a cause for that. And that's one of the challenges that I face.
Do you think you run enough positive stories, or, well, and also tied in with that question, do you think negative news sells better than positive news?
There's an old expression in newspapers: if it bleeds, it leads. I quite happily would love to put a story on the front about a family giving back to Bronglaze. And I'm thinking of one case, a kid called Kai from Bow Street. If I have it, yes, absolutely. Sadly, there's not enough of those. For me, it's what's of interest. Interesting in that in Canada's largest newspaper, the Globe and Mail, 360,000 copies a day. You couldn't put a dead body on the front because it would upset people in the morning over their cornflakes. So we used to call it, no, it's got the crispy factor, you can't. So we'd be picking pictures, and it's like, nah, it's Rice Krispies. You'd say, no, you can't. And we knew that was shorthand was, no, it's too bloody. Whereas when you go to Dubai, largest newspaper in English language newspaper in the Middle East, other than the Jerusalem Post, they loved a bloody picture, and particularly if it was, an Israeli airstrike on Gaza, and there was a kid's hand sticking out of the sand, and that was front page. You just knew straight away. So the different newspapers of different organisations. Would I put a dead body on the front in the Cambrian? No, I wouldn't. No.
But you can sway opinion as a newspaper, because if you're just putting negative stuff on there, not all negative,
do you think
all the time.
I'm negative?
Not at all. No, I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is it sways people's opinions, doesn't it? So if you balance it out a little bit, maybe. I'm certainly not telling you how to do your job. I'm not telling you that. But what I'm saying, if you balance it out a little bit.
Being an editor of a newspaper is because it's the one thing that everybody else feels they could do better.
I'm not saying that. Yeah. I'm not saying that.
No. I know, but everybody knows or tells you, oh, you know what you should do? You should do this. Whereas if you're plastering, nobody actually says to you, well, you should use whatever the mix is, or you should put a bit, nobody tells you how to plaster a wall, except maybe other plasterers. But that's one thing that I find rather amusing.
I think it's MPs are running the country as well, because like everyone sort of thinks they can do it better, but in fact it must be like an incredibly difficult job.
But you know what? It's not working. I'm 64, and I was in Canada for a friend's son's wedding recently. And all my buddies there are starting to retire, have retired. I said, oh, Mick, what about you? When are you retired? And I said, I haven't started working yet. And that's the way I feel. Like I've had so much fun. Yeah, even watching people, cleaning up after massacres or whatnot, but it is, I don't feel that I've worked because it's an adventure.
That's amazing though, isn't it? I say this all the time. I'm kind of like envious of people who've got like a huge passion for their work, because I enjoy my job, but to say I'm like really, really passionate about it is a stretch. So I think it's incredible.
I love starting shit. No, I love putting newspapers out and making sure that the story is the best that it can be. And journalism is actually a very, very simple job. It's about telling what happened and getting it right. Telling what happened is quite easy. Getting it right, that takes more time. Getting it first, then you're into competitors. How you tell it now, be it on multimedia, but at its very essence, journalism is about telling what happened and getting it right. And at the Cambrian News, we tell what happened. We mostly get it right, and if we don't, we get it right the following week.
Do you? We're going to talk a little bit about sources. How does that work? Does sometimes people contact you and say, "This has just happened"? Is it the people who work for the paper and they just kind of like they're on it, or do you have some people say, "By the way, this is happening now"?
All of the above.
Everything.
Yeah.
Because it's quite an interesting subject matter, isn't it? We think like, well, they are on that fast. You know what I mean? They're on that fast.
Yeah. Look, social media has made our job a lot easier. People, we obviously monitor Facebook groups. We obviously monitor X or whatever. That's even what's going to happen with X. That's an interesting one. Do we stick with it, or do we go for something else, or it's losing its credibility as far as I'm concerned. Don't like it. So that all helps.
Yeah.
Which is before newsrooms were much bigger. They tell me at the Cambrian News, we had an office in Lampeter, we had an office in Portmalloch, and there was like 10 staff running in Aberystwyth and six staff, whatever else. Well, we don't have that nowadays. But what we do have is access to news gathering that those reporters would have been out doing their patch. So business has changed. I started off writing on typewriters.
Yeah.
I've filed stories on sat phones. At the newspaper in Canada, it was 14 editions, and 14 editions, 6 press plants, 5 time zones. And you miss, if you're 20 minutes late into Vancouver, you miss the ferry for Vancouver Island, so that was 10,000 papers. So then you had to break out air freight, and it's just it's fascinating.
Do you think being a journalist has made your skin thicker, or do you think naturally as a person you had quite thick skin?
I think I'm quite a sensitive person, actually.
The only reason why I said that is because I think being in a position that, not necessarily now, a little bit now with the Cambrian News, but more so just, journalists all across sort of the world, I would have thought you had to have quite thick skin, from down to what you witness, down to what you hear, people telling you how to do your job.
Like me. But I'm assuming you must get backlash.
All right. Chris, my second wife, she was a photographer, and she went to Rwanda when the Hutus were killing the Tutsis. And her job at the magazine was to be an aid worker for a month. So every morning she would go around the refugee camp picking up dead babies and taking them to the mass grave and that. And that affected her. When we came back to Canada, we'd be driving the highway and they'd leave bags of garbage. If the road crews were out, they'd pile up the garbage and put it in the bag, and then the truck would come along later and pick up the bags. But you'd see her looking at the bags, and I knew where her mind was back to Rwanda. She ended up committing suicide.
That's really sad. I'm really sorry to hear that. Yeah, it's awful.
So there is a price, but at the same time I feel very privileged to do what I've done, Yeah.
Sorry to bring that up.
Yeah.
But
No, that's...
But yeah, I mean, I don't know how that could not affect anybody. That sounds like probably the worst job you could probably do in the whole world. You know what I mean? or witness.
But to get to do something like that is incredible too.
It is.
See, there's one thing: the less people have in this world, the more they give. And I mean, I've sat with film stars and princes and whatnot. But to sit with somebody, a family in a hut, who have a bean stew, and they tell you, no, you eat first.
Yeah.
And you have to eat, otherwise you're insulting them.
Yeah.
So you take a polite amount and whatnot. And you're privileged to be in circumstances like that.
Definitely.
So it's been an adventure, and I've learned a lot. And funny, just to go, we started on, my dad was a postman. I would go into places and I would often say, Dad is long gone, but I often say to Dad, are you watching, can you believe this? Are you seeing this? You know, like tremendously privileged to do what I've done, you know?
Yeah.
Had an amazing career, Mick.
Incredible.
It's not over yet.
No. Still going. No sign of retiring.
No.
How do you handle like ethical dilemmas while reporting? And this might more so be involved in your previous work before the Cambrian News, but do you ever thought about that sort of too deeply when you were reporting on something?
I think about it every week sometimes, and sometimes I feel maybe I'm being too hard with that headline is unfair, and I have sat down even with the Cambrian, I've written a headline, I said, yeah, I like that headline. And then I'll go back to it the next day. I'll be sitting watching Everton lose, and I'm thinking, no, that's. And I'll go back to it and then tweak the headline and make it fair. Or I'll call my number 2 and I'll say, Dylan, what do you think of that headline? He said, well, the very fact you're calling me means you have doubts about it. Yeah. So there's always second doubts, but. All of I mean, I sleep. I do sleep at night with those decisions. Yeah. In terms of ethical, I face a challenge every week from people who ask for this stuff to be. Supposing you were 20 years of age, you got involved in a bar fight or something, and you've been in front of the court. Now, as far as the court is concerned, it's done with, right? So now you're 25, you finished the degree, you've straightened on, and you're going for this big job, and so human resources Googled you and said, hang on, he was in a bar fight when he was 20. Mm-hmm. So they ask for that stuff to be taken off the archives.
Ah, right, okay.
Right, taken off. I can't do it, because if it's in print, does that mean they have to go and cut out every reference to it? That's historical record. What I tell them to do is to go to Google and ask to exercise the right to be forgotten. It's not up to me to change history.
No. Right? I think it's quite dangerous if you start deleting history.
Yeah.
It's happened in the past and it continues to happen.
It's cancel culture, isn't it?
But
you can't do it.
You can't do it.
No.
But that's, I faced that. And funny, I run the Tenby Observer as well, and they're worse at it in Tenby than they are in... Maybe they're not as. Maybe my reputation hasn't reached
the waters
temperature as it has in Ceredigion or Greenwich. But that's one that comes up regularly, you know. And I do feel sorry for people, but I just can't do it, you know.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
Any regrets through your career, Mick?
No. I've laid off staff at different newspapers, and that's as a result of decisions that were taken at a board level. Or I have regrets about that, but it was beyond my control.
Yeah.
Because there were good friends, colleagues, and I regret that. I often think that if I was, I wouldn't, the way journalism has changed so much now, I wouldn't necessarily go into it right now as a career of starting out. Maybe the solicitor would have been a good option. But I wouldn't go into it now, because I think I don't think there'd be newspapers in 10 years' time. I fear what AI is doing, and I fear that truth is being downplayed and simply ignored. And I think that Mr. Trump in Washington, surrounded by Mr. Musk and Zuckerberg, I think that's a very dangerous thing. And I'm glad that I'm winding down.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about Donald Trump, actually. He's such a polarizing figure. And he's obviously getting involved with a lot of different things, including Gaza now, or is at least trying to get involved in Gaza.
Ridiculous. The Arabs would never go for it. Arabs would never go for it. And Iran certainly won't, because, I mean, the thing about having lived in the Middle East, you learn very quickly that, well, Gaza is Hamas, it's Shia. The West Bank is Sunni, and it was Fatah, by and large. Generalizations, of course, and that Iran is not going to abide by its people. It's just not going to happen.
It's pretty wild out there at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah, I'd love to be there.
Oh my goodness.
Just the world in general, though, it just seems to be in such a strange place at the moment.
Yeah, there's a lot going on, isn't
there?
You know?
I know. And I sit on the couch at night and I watch the news and I shake my head and I think, what the hell?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And I'm a news professional. I just say, what the hell?
And you've been there, seen it.
Exactly.
Bought the T-shirt, the whole lot. One of my final questions before we go.
We never got to Guantanamo Bay, by the way.
That's exactly what I was going to ask you. That's my final question before the quickfire. Can you tell me about Guantanamo Bay and what it was like and why you were sent there?
Well, let's wind up with your last bit first. Why I was sent there, I wanted to go because I thought it'd be fascinating. Yeah. I was sitting in the office in Dubai and there was a story about Guantanamo Bay, and I said, "Oh, love to go to Guantanamo." Yeah. So, Googled, inquired, ended up getting in touch with the Pentagon and then U.S. Central Command in Tampa Bay, I think it was, getting Pentagon clearance. Took about 6 months for everything. You had to give a list of everything you're bringing in terms of cameras, SD cards, phones, the whole shebang, right? And when you get there, the first time I went, I actually flew from Dubai 14 hours to Fort Lauderdale, spent 2 days sitting at the airport in Fort Lauderdale for the flight down to Guantanamo, and a hurricane hit, so 14,000 miles back to Dubai. So 28,000 miles in 3 days. A couple of weeks later, got back in, same thing over. When you land at Guantanamo, if you're familiar with Borth and Abu Dhabi, right?
Yep.
So it would be like you landed at Abu Dhabi, right, on a stretch of land there, say on the beach, and then you take the boat across to Guantanamo Bay itself. So Guantanamo Bay would be like all of the Diffie Valley there, right? Yeah. So you would land on, say, the Abu Dhabi side, get the boat across, and then you're into Guantanamo Bay. Now, I have been to Cuba proper on holiday when I was living in Canada. So I'm probably one of the few people in the world who's actually been to both places. It's surrounded by wire. And there's very little land there. The camps themselves, the prison camps are along the beach, highly guarded. And then imagine the town being just like Borth. So leaving Borth, going out down towards Yunislas with the camps down Yunislas. It's very much an American town. 8 o'clock in the morning, 6 o'clock at night, everything stops. They sound and the flags go up and down, and there's a Subway there, a McDonald's, there's an Irish bar, and it's very, very surreal because these people, they fly in from Norfolk or whatever for their 6-month rotation, and that's it. And they're basically prison guards. And when I was there was 122 prisoners, and I think 2,500 people guarding them.
Wow. That's a high ratio,
big
isn't
ratio.
it? If you're
For
thinking
what
about
reason then? Why was there so many?
Well, they have to maintain the infrastructure. They just there's a very, 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 very high guard ratio. I mean, part of Guantanamo is considered to be a crime scene in international court terms because they have to maintain that site. It's actually very interesting. The Americans have a lease on it, I think, for 400 years as a result of the Spanish-American War, where Cuba was involved. The Hearst newspaper war is 1901 or whatever it was. So the Americans went in and helped the Cubans, and they signed this lease for a naval station, and it's actually a coaling station, right? So at the time, ships were powered by coal. Yep. So the Americans said, well, we'd like to have a coaling station, please. Permanent coaling station rights in Cuba. So they gave them Guantanamo Bay. It's Guantanamo Naval Station. And there's actually a wharf there that's got coal on it still as part of the lease that the Americans maintain. Since, what was his name? The Cuban Fidel came to power, he never cashed the check, the annual check. I think it was cashed once, and the bureaucrat who cashed the check was shot. But it's absolutely surreal. I think the cruelest person I ever met in my life was actually a doctor. She, in her normal life, she's a pediatrician from Boston, and in her military life, she would force feed prisoners. There was 55 prisoners on hunger strike. And what they determine hunger strike, it's not like in Northern Ireland where you say, I'm going to hunger strike and I'm not eating. Right? So it's not like that. Yeah. The Americans they know how many calories are on the plate going in. And if they determine that you're not taking your calorific intake, or they determine that you're on hunger strike, so you haven't got the right to die. This woman, so basically what happens is if you're on hunger strike, you're not eating, you're in the cell, and twice a day, the guards will come in forcefully, put you in a chair, tie you down with ties, and hold your neck back. And then there's just like you have in the hospital for transfusions, there's a machine there. Yep. So she will come in and she'll stick a piece of tube down your nose into your stomach, put some water in to make sure that it's actually in your stomach, not into your lungs. And then they'll put a can of Ensure or whatever it is. Yeah. So you're sitting there for 2 hours. And you have to be there for 2 hours, because if you're there, if they released you, you'd puke it out, and that'd be a waste of time. But they do this twice a day to the inmates, and that's what she does. And I asked her, I said, you're a doctor, do no harm, right? Hippocratic oath. And she said, oh, I'm keeping these people alive. And I said, but what if they want to actually die? They don't have the right to die. So they actually control everything. It's frightening. When I was there was 122 prisoners. Probably about 15 were really bad bastards. They were the ones ballybombing, the masterminds in 9/11. A lot of the guys were simply wrong place, wrong time, and picked up. The Americans would pay $100 in Afghanistan to find Al-Qaeda or terrorists, call it what you will. So if I didn't like you, sure as hell I'm going to get $100 and I'm going to turn you in, So you're going to be sweated, you're going to be put in stress positions, you're going to be deprived of sleep, you're probably going to give lip back, you're going to be transferred, they do the same to you again, and you're not given any answers, or you're just being a stubborn mule, and then you end up in Guantanamo. Do I feel sympathy? Yeah, I feel sympathy for a lot of the guys in there. I think I'm, and having a grandfather who was in prison, I think that it would be very easy to get caught up in that. But to spend 13 years, and one guy I did a piece on, his name is Obadallah, and he had a daughter he hadn't seen, and actually his lawyer was doing pro bono work, and she had a son the same age as Obadallah's, and she became very attached. So I actually met her during the 2-day layover waiting for the hurricane to blow through, so I got fantastic details in Obadallah's life. And then we tracked down in Dubai, we tracked down his family. We had a Pashtun speaker and got in touch with the family and just put together this. It was an award-winning piece. I got a gold medal in Hong Kong from the World Association of Newspapers for that one. Absolutely. But the one thing that you'd see these prisoners, you can as a journalist, you had no contact. You had to look down at them from a darkened place, and absolute quiet. And these guys were living their lives. You know, if you were non-compliant, you were let out of your cell 1 hour a week, and you had a choice to actually walk in a yard that's 10 meters by 10 meters with 10 meter high. You only see a patch of sky, or you could watch television. And they showed me the television, and it was a soft armchair, but there was chains on it, so that you were chained in to watch television for your hour. And the Americans had, the guards had a Labrador dog, or a big retriever dog, that was their stress. When they came off their shift, they could go and pet the dog and distress, and because it was so stressful for the poor guards, just hypocrites,
isn't it?
It was just
surreal
place.
I can only imagine. Thanks for sharing that with us. Incredible.
Just trying to take in everything you've just been telling us, Mick.
Do I have to sit through a quick fire now?
Just real.
If that's all right.
Real quick one.
Quick and painless, isn't it? If Dave wants to start it off.
Yeah, it's just to
it's just to get it back to sort of.
Have you got a favourite film, Mick?
Yeah.
Favourite film?
Film.
One called Black Robe.
Black Robe.
Black Robe. It's a Canadian one. It's about
I've heard of
priest trying to bring religion to the Hurons. It's very unusual. Black Robe.
Okay.
Love Fargo too.
Oh yeah,
the film Fargo.
Yeah.
Brilliant film.
Or The Usual Suspects.
Some great choice there. What about music? It might be a favorite song, favorite album. What kind of genre?
If you looked at my Spotify mix, there'd be anything on it from anything from the 80s, 90s, Canadian country music. Very eclectic mix. Okay. I still owe Bono £46.
Please tell me that story.
Come on, let's hear it.
Live Aid, have you done it?
No, it's better. University College Dublin got involved in organising concerts at lunchtime. So 300 seat theatre, £1 in. Band got £100. If we made any money out of the 200, that was the thinking. So we hired this band in. They were brutal. Wouldn't go anywhere. Singer was skinhead, knee-high purple docks, custard yellow crew neck. Terrible.
Strong look.
So they were playing away, and they could see, because they were due £100, they could see 54 people came. U2. Never go anywhere, that band.
No way.
So I still owe Bono 46 quid. I think he's all right without it. But that was, I reckon, March of 79. Yeah.
And whereabouts was that? Sorry, did they play that gig?
That was University College Dublin. At lunchtime. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
They've done all right.
Yeah. Do you know the difference between God and Bono?
No.
God doesn't walk around Dublin thinking he's Bono.
That was brilliant. Do you have a favourite food takeaway?
I'm a fantastic cook, and I cook all things. Like, if you want a risotto, I'll cook it. I do Indian food, Arabic food, Italian food, Chinese, you name it, I do it. That's my hobby. That's my distressor. That's what I do. Would spend 15 hours smoking a piece of meat if need be. Just, that's what I do. That's my hobby. My wife says I've got too many kitchen gadgets and whatnot, but she go to a fashion store, I go to a kitchen store, you know.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Proper foodie then.
Yeah.
Love it. Do you have a favourite cereal, even if it's from your childhood?
Cereal?
Yeah, cereal.
Special K, cornflakes.
Yeah. I just always ask that question. That's all.
Why?
I just do.
That's it, Mick.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks so much.
It was really interesting.